Okay, we've taken opportunity cost to the point where we've got two options. What we do is at the top of our list of things that are most important to us at the time. What comes in second place, we're calling that our opportunity cost. So to come to class for one person, it might be a high opportunity cost. To come to class for another person, it could be a low opportunity cost. Without going too far off tangent, the role of entrepreneurs in society is to produce more options out there, which give us lower opportunity cost, and that increases our standard of living. But let's take the illustration of Farmer Jones, who grows wheat. And he's got 3 young sons, and they help him on the farm. And if they work as hard as they can, put in as much time as they possibly can with the amount of acreage that they have in Ohio, in this area it's always 160 acres, let's say they can produce this amount of wheat. And again, we're on an XY axis. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. This is the origin where there would be 0 wheat. But in Ohio, when it's springtime, you got to wait until the ground thaws and then becomes hard enough and that you can get the tractors out on it so it doesn't sink. But once that time comes, it's just work your tail off until the wintertime comes. Because when the wintertime comes, you can only change the oil so many times or once, and it's changed if you're not going to take the tractor back out. And you can't paint the barns, it's too cold out, and you basically go inside and hibernate until the winter's over. And that means that for the 3 sons of Farmer Jones, they usually play video games, drink beer, eat potato chips, and kind of consume a lot of the profits that they made producing wheat during the farm year. But Farmer Jones notices something. As he's farming along, he notices that as he changes the oil on the tractor, and when EPA is not watching, he might spill some accidentally on the ground, and he does that over by the rock pile. And every farm, at least in Ohio, has a rock pile, because every spring the farmer sends his sons out there and a lot of other help to go pick up the rocks, because rocks just keep coming up because of freeze-thaw action every year. And so the rock pile over the years never stays the same, it always grows. So he's changing the oil and happened to throw down an old cigarette butt there, and for some strange reason, maybe he had some gasoline in it or something like that, he started a fire, and he happens to notice that one kind of those rocks in that rock pile begin to burn. And as that rock burns, he notices that it's a shiny black part of the rocks. And he realizes, oh, that's anthracite coal in there. There must be some coal rocks just underneath the surface here that where we're growing our wheat. And this thought crosses Farmer Jones's mind. Oh, they usually come from about this section of the land over here. For the most part they do. Maybe it's bigger than that. And I wonder, rather than have these 3 sons just sit around all winter and drink beer and bulk up, as farm guys get big from what they do, maybe I could, because I don't want them to go get a city job, because I'm going to need them when spring comes. And so it's worth it to me for that's just to goof off. As long as they stay here, that's okay, because I'm going to need them in springtime. But I'm wondering if I could take off the topsoil of this area right here and pile it up over here. And I got this subsoiler, and I got a dump truck, and I got a front end loader, that I could maybe do some strip mining of coal during the wintertime, and rather than those guys just sit around and eat up profits, I could get them doing something that's profitable in the wintertime, and we'll go back to growing our wheat in the summertime. Now notice if we do that, we're going to be producing down here on this axis some coal. So rather than producing all wheat and no coal, we're going to produce some coal. But if we're going to produce some coal, then we can't be growing wheat when there's no topsoil over here. So we're going to have to reduce the amount of wheat we produce in order to produce some amount of coal. We go from zero coal production to some amount of coal production. And the amount of wheat, let's just put some numbers here. Let's say it goes from 1,000 units down to 950 units. So now we've got an operation. We're producing wheat in our regular year, but we're producing coal during the winter. And so we're getting revenue from our wheat and revenue from our coal. But the cost of producing some coal, the opportunity cost is, in this case, 50 units of wheat. We had to give up 50 units of wheat in order to produce, let's say, 20 units of coal. And so we go from point A down here to point B, and we could connect, if I can draw from this side, it's easier, we connect some dots. And as the farmer is doing this, he's saying, this coal is pretty good business, the price is pretty steady, and I've got to sell this wheat before I ever grow it in order to lock in the price, and that's kind of risky business too on the futures market. I think I'm going to expand my coal operation, and I'll probably even take more land to do coal down here. So if I produce more coal, that means I have to give up the production of more and more wheat. And we could be, now notice, we're working as hard as we possibly can, producing both wheat and coal. And the Farmer Jones could even say, well, forget wheat altogether. I'm doing pretty good on this coal business. I want to be down here producing, if I can put an X down here, all coal, no wheat. So if we connect the dots, and I'm on the wrong side to draw this very well, okay? We get what's called the production possibility curve or the production possibility frontier. Now, what you need to notice about this production possibility frontier is if we're at point A, we're working as hard as we possibly can at point A. We're working as hard as we possibly can, we'll call this B, C, and D. We're working as hard as we possibly can at point D. We're maxed out no matter where on this production possibility curve we are. So now we're talking about if we're going to work as hard as we possibly can, what are all the different combinations of wheat versus coal? And that would put us on our production possibility curve. Now, notice it's possible that we could be inside our curve someplace. If we're inside our curve, we're only producing this amount of wheat and this amount, if I could draw straight down, this amount of coal. In that case, we could increase our coal without decreasing wheat, or we could increase our wheat without decreasing our coal because we're inside our production possibility curve. In other words, we have unused resources. If we're on the production possibility curve, we've maxed out. We've used our resources to the maximum extent that we possibly can. So how could we get out here? Well, in the short run, we can't. New technology, new ideas, maybe if we buy the neighbor's farm or something, we could move this curve outward. But ordinarily, all you can do is all you can do. Now, for instance, what would it look like if we decided to produce right here? It's a free market. We can do whatever we want. What would it look like if Farmer Jones decided, I'm going to be right here. I don't want to produce any wheat. I don't want to produce any coal. I just want to be lazy. Well, that's possible. That's possible. Just doesn't want to get out of bed. Let the sun do whatever he wants, or any kind of possibility inside here. But normally, people normally want to make as much money as they possibly can. And so if they have the opportunity to make more money, they usually take it, and that puts them on the production possibility curve. Sometimes there are external events that might cause our production possibility curve to collapse. For instance, in this room, we have electricity, we have lights, and that's running the cameras. If all of a sudden those lights went out because of lack of electricity, then we would have to stop filming this particular section, and the production possibility curve of producing these short tutorials would collapse. Our production possibility curve can collapse. If we lost technology, if we had a solar storm, sunstorm, and it struck all the power lines and it blew the transformers, then the production possibility curve of the output of what we produce could collapse. Now, this concept of, in my illustration here, of wheat and coal for Farmer Jones really came into the economic textbooks as two other options. And in the economic textbooks, beginning around the 60s, we had production possibility curve examples of guns and butter. In the 60s, there was this war called the Vietnam War. And we also had this phenomenon where students were very, very politically oriented, and there were anti-war rallies and people singing songs like, "War, huh? What is it good for? Absolutely nothing." That was the time period where there was the Berkeley free speech movement, and students were very actively involved. And the government began to get afraid because they had this military objective over here in the other part of the world, and these students were shaping public opinion, and they were undermining the government's support for this particular Vietnam War, and that wasn't good. And so the campuses were filled with FBI and CIA informants, although they weren't supposed to be there. And we now know that because we have people in the FBI who are now long retired who get on YouTube and tell about their experiences. So people really thought it was that way, but we couldn't be sure. But now anyone who's living that long now knows that's particularly true. Now, the students in that free speech movement were saying something about this guns and butter production possibility curve. Now, they were very motivated to pass their economics class. If they didn't pass their economics class and they flunked out of college, it's just a matter of weeks, not even months. It's a matter of weeks until they would find themselves in a rice paddy with wet boots and a helmet and an M1 looking for people that didn't want them there. So they were very motivated to stay in class, very motivated to pass their class, and they were very motivated to speak out against the war because there was a thing called a draft at that point in time. And if you had the wrong numbers, you're going to go anyway, unless you were in school and you were able to stay in school. And they brought up this particular illustration. And the illustration is this. If we have a cube of steel, we could take that cube of steel and send it to Lima, Ohio, and make a tank out of it to fight bad guys someplace in the world. Or we could take that same cube of steel at that point in time and send it to Detroit, Michigan, and make a car out of it that we could all tool around in and have a lot of fun. But that same cube of steel can't go both places at the same time. And the argument of the students was this war is affecting the economic standard of living of everyone in this country, and it's reducing our economic wealth, our economic standard of living, as long as the government wants to fight this war someplace else in the world. Now, we can only produce so much guns. If everything, we were like a Greek Spartan culture, and we just lived to overcome and overrun and take over some other nation, and that's what life is all about. Just taking over other people and expanding, and we're all about guns, we're all about military, we're all about conquering, we're all about empire. Well, then the reason you have kids is so that you have more soldiers, and the reason you have cars is so that you can go to do your military training. Everything is about the military. On the other extreme, we could have people like the hippie movements at the time that would take flowers or daisies and put them in the guns of the National Guard when they would come on the campuses. And by the way, this whole free speech movement, this whole anti-war movement, it stopped right here in Ohio. It came to a complete, absolute dead stop almost overnight at a place called Kent State University. And Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young sang a song called "For Dead in Ohio." That's what that was all about. So now we've got a culture that could be all about, debating philosophy and going to operas and making poetry and pictures and music, or we could have a culture that's all about imperialism and aggression and being the biggest, baddest military power on the face of the globe. But you can't have both. You can't have total of this or total of this at the same time, but you can have some combination of the two, and that combination would be some production possibility curve, where we have some amount of guns here. We'll put this right here. So in this case, here's our 0, 0, if I can, right here. So this is our origin. So in this case, it's possible for us to produce this much, that much output of guns, while at the same time we're producing this much output of consumer goods, cars, cereal, movies, theater plays, all those sorts of things that we like. Oops, right here. Yes, it goes to this point right here. So it's possible we could have this amount of military stuff and this amount of consumption good, just like it's possible to be any place else on this curve. And now it comes down to the politics, the economics and the politics of where are we going to be on this curve. At that point in time, the Soviet Union was up in this neck of the woods, where the United States of America was tend to be down in this neck of the woods, because they were spending a larger percentage of their GDP on military armaments than the Americans were, but our economy was a lot stronger as well. We're going to come back and do some number crunching on this production possibility curve and do some illustrations, and I think I'm going to try to post something on Canvas so that we can actually compute the opportunity cost as we move from point A to point B or point D to point E. But we're going to work on that in our next video section. Until then, thank you for watching.